Welcome to episode 364 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Jenn Morris from Ship Happens. Jen's going to analyse the opportunities for postal operators in food delivery. Joining me on the line is logistics consultant Jenn Morris from Ship Happens. Jenn, welcome to the Postal Hub podcast. We're going to be talking about food delivery today. Now, not meal delivery, but food delivery. But before we get into this topic, Jenn, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your own history in logistics and the business that you're running, and especially in relation to food transport, because you have quite a bit of experience when it comes to food transport.
I started in the industry about 21 years ago. And my main specialty was working in produce transport, which is, I would say, the hardest of all of the transports because you're literally moving something that's dying. So I did that for about 15 years. And now I run my own business and I do consulting for people that do food shipping, deliveries, that kind of thing. And then I also write about it on my blog too. So it's kind of an all-encompassing situation at this point.
So let's talk about the different kinds of food delivery that are out there, because when we talk about food delivery, it could be anything from farm to warehouse, warehouse to supermarket to the doorstep, or from a distribution center directly to the doorstep. So What do you see is out there at the moment, and what is the opportunity for the postal world, I suppose, in all of that, all that food distribution network?
So the current distribution network is quite traditional. Like you said, you're going farm or production facility to a warehouse to the grocery store, and then grocery store either into somebody's cart and they drive it home themselves, or somebody gets delivery from the grocery company themselves. There's not a lot of delivery of food directly to consumers from the manufacturers. However, we are starting to see that change a little bit. There are companies that do maybe non-perishables that get delivered pretty regularly through the mail. And I think that there is an opportunity for at least semi-perishables or less perishable items. Like I think like maybe doing deliveries of ice cream through the mail is probably not going to be the first thing we should jump into. But things like cured meats and things like that, I think are kind of low-hanging fruit, really, because they do require more handling than the typical package, but not as much handling as some items. So I think that there is a spectrum of food delivery when it comes to direct to consumer. And I think that there is a bit more opportunity there than I think people really think there is.
I suppose one of the concepts that puts the postal world off food delivery is keeping things at the right temperature. So refrigerated transport, in other words. So is what you're saying that we shouldn't think purely in terms of that refrigerated transport? There's other, what did you call them? You call them non-perishable or pantry items. Is that the right term for those goods that don't necessarily need to be kept at a certain temperature, like rice or pasta or
yeah, of course. Like all the non-perishable items, like that stuff is shipping through the postal service at this point already. Especially specialty foods or supplements, things like that. Like you see that stuff moving pretty often. And you do see some items like semi-perishables going through like cured meats and things like that. I think when it comes to temperature, there's like a misunderstanding of temperature. For example, in transportation, like full truckload or LTL, there's temperatures that you run at. And when it comes to LTL, for example, you've got all these different products on a shipment, and maybe they all don't typically run exactly at the same temperature, but they run within a same temperature range. And so that's why they're compatible to run together. So yeah, like you're not going to ship ice cream with like cheese because those two temperature groups don't go together, but you can ship cheese with like a bunch of other things that run at the same temperature range. So I think when it comes to managing temperature, there is a opportunity for postal services to potentially look at, okay, like what would it take to do this? There are companies that do LTL regularly. And so like if they matched up with companies that do things like that, then maybe the last mile of the delivery could be handled by a postal service. I don't see why it couldn't be done. I get that there's probably a lot of infrastructure that would need to be invested in, but I think it could be worth the investment. We see a lot of small businesses now trying to deliver direct to consumer instead of going through the traditional retail route. And I think with that, there's a lot of opportunity to match up companies together in certain regions and things like that, pick up a bunch of things all at once and then deliver them all around the same time as well. I feel like there's a missed opportunity somewhere, and I would love to see somebody kind of really take that on.
Well, you've just been talking about these different classes of food. I'm probably not using the right terms, but if you're a postal operator and you're used to just shipping stuff and you've got broad terms and conditions that say, well, you're not allowed to send, whether it's live animals or lithium batteries or whatever it might be, there are certain exclusions, but otherwise the postal operator might not have a huge degree of visibility over what they're carrying. So how can postal operators understand the actual product that they're moving and what can be mixed with what and what can be delivered at a certain temperature or all those sorts of things? How can you start on that journey?
So normally retailers have what's referred to as specifications for each item so that they're clear on like how those items need to be treated. They have them for everything: produce, non-perishable items, perishable items, refrigerated items. They all have a spec that goes along with them. This is the temperature it should run at. These are the foods that it can run with, that kind of situation. I think that there is nothing stopping postal companies from doing that. Like, I don't think that everyone in the postal system needs to be educated on these items, for example. It would be a specialty service, of course, but I think you could have a team within the system that manages that kind of business, that they understand it, they are educated on it, they are trained on it so that they can make sure that they're providing the service properly.
One of the challenges we have in the postal sector, as we all know, is that letter volumes are generally trending downwards and that we're still obliged to send the delivery personnel, whether it's a contractor or a postal employee, out every day to deliver to every address. So we've got potentially the capacity out there, or at the very least, you've got a lot of posts that are looking to diversify their income. So this is, this food delivery concept is something that they really are looking at very carefully. And we know that a number of posts over the last, 10 years have had a crack at it in one way or another. Let's talk about some of the practicalities, though. The image that's often conjured up when it comes to food delivery is refrigerated vans, and that's not something that a lot of posts will have. But there's a lot more than that, isn't there, when it comes to food delivery, whether it's packaging or temperature monitoring or things like that. So can you just talk about some of those practicalities that are involved in food delivery?
Yeah, you talk about temperature, and I think that that's really what we're talking about here. Like food delivery in general, like I said, there's a lot of non-perishable items getting delivered by mail and whatnot pretty regularly. I don't think that there is any confusion there. Now, when it does come to temperature controlled items, there is more that would go into it. Yes, you would have to worry about what kind of packaging you're using, whether it's being delivered to a person when you're at the door of the person's house. You can't just leave stuff in the middle of winter that's perishable on somebody's front porch. There's a line there, right? Of how long something could sit outside. And then on top of it, figuring out how the temperature was run during the transit. So there are things like RFID that can kind of give you more visibility into where things are and whatnot. I think that a lot of items, depending on the perishability of them, would have to have some sort of temperature recorder running with them so that there was some clarity on how it ran, what it looks like, where were the issues and whatnot, because essentially every time that item changes hands, there's obviously going to be a slight change in temperature from one place to the next. I think with this, though, there is a possibility of looking at it from a standpoint of maybe you don't deliver it every single day. You don't pick up every single day. Maybe you look at it from what we refer to in LTL as a sailing schedule. Okay, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday we pick up, every Tuesday, Thursday we make deliveries. So that items are not being held for too long, first of all, but also you get that mass so that you can move a good chunk of it at a reasonable price, because that's the other key part of this, is making sure that you can do it at a price that makes sense for businesses. So if you're like charging to do it every single day, obviously the price would probably be quite ridiculous, I would assume. But if you're like cutting that in half even and having only a sailing schedule, then you might have a little bit more flexibility with the pricing with the customers.
There's a lot of investment happening in the postal sector in technology. And so part of me says, well, if you're considering as a postal operator to do some sort of food delivery, now is the time to look at the technology requirements around that. But when you're talking about these sailing schedules, and that you might not need to do a refrigerated or a temperature controlled delivery daily, that is also a mindset change for the postal world, because we hear it all the time in the postal world that you have to have a clean floor at the end of the shift, right? Clean floor at the end of the shift. There's nothing left behind. Everything's out. So do we have to change our mindset there, or do we have to change the way that our networks are constructed to allow for this? Just on this idea, though, of the sailing schedules, as you've put it, do you see that as a viable option for a delivery network to have, say, you've got your regular post that's going out daily? Do you add the food delivery to that same delivery person, or is it something that ends up being a specialist delivery? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think because of the infrastructure required, like a refrigerated vehicle, for example, it would be a waste to be having non-refrigerated or non-temperature control items on those trucks, right? So you want to maximize the space that you have for that refrigerated vehicle. How I envision it is that you would have one refrigerated vehicle going around a town making pickups at whatever companies, and then the next day, that same truck would go out and make deliveries to the consumers, depending on where the products are going. Now, that's a little bit more localized. And I think, to be honest, that's the first step, is that you would have some sort of localized way of doing it to kind of work out kinks. And then you can move on to potentially sending things across the country.
So in Canada, for example, what I would do if I was working at Canada Post, I would start programs in some of the major cities to test the program. So in Toronto, like the GTA, what we call the Greater Toronto Area, Montreal, Greater Montreal Area, Vancouver, maybe Calgary. And I would start a program based off of companies that need it, that I know that there are small businesses that were looking for the services, or medium-sized, whatever size businesses really. And then the demand. So like you need a population to test it. And then I would like have that program go for like a year, maybe even two, to see how it goes. Where are the problems? What kind of issues come up? How can we fix them? What did we potentially miss? Like I didn't know what was going to happen, because listen, it's transportation. Stuff's going to happen that you did not expect all the time. If you don't get surprised every day, you don't work in transportation. That's my firm belief. So for me, that's kind of how I would start it. And then if the program was successful, which I think it probably would be, and you are able to work out the kinks, then you can start looking at like, okay, what areas can we expand this to? How far can we expand? And then you kind of like do some data digging around that. Who is interested in buying things from Toronto, maybe that are out west, who is from out west wants to ship to Toronto, those kinds of things. And then you kind of expand the program based on the data and the need/want of the clients and customers.
If you're a postal operator listening to this and you're thinking, well, maybe there's an opportunity for me here in my home market, or however it works for you, what's the first step that you're going to take, though? If you've got loads of postal expertise, you got loads of expertise in moving letters, moving parcels. What's your first step, though, to starting to put together a pilot or a concept?
I think it's kind of twofold. I think, first of all, definitely you should have somebody, a consultant, but don't get like a generic consultant that has never worked in this world, has never moved produce, or has never moved any kind of temperature control product. Like you need somebody that has done that and has done it a lot, because there's a lot of things that go into it, and it's very It can be very confusing. It can be very demanding. So like you need somebody that kind of has that knowledge. And then the other part that I would say is I would reach out to your clientele, the people that are shipping with you. I would reach out to them, and companies that you know probably ship this kind of produce or this kind of product, you should reach out to them and maybe do some surveys, get some data of understanding of like, what do they ship? Where do they want to ship it? Like, where are they getting more customers that they cannot service because the service doesn't exist? So that's kind of what I would look at. I would also maybe even use social media to kind of get a good grasp on like places that you can tell have that need, or at least have that clientele that are looking for being able to ship that product to them. So I think that there's a lot of data out there. So you kind of have to mix the data with someone that actually knows what they're talking about.
So this is potentially an exciting opportunity for a number of postal operators out there to find a new income stream, find a way to support the universal service obligation, find a way to expand your importance to the community and add to the bottom line and all of that. Jen, if people want to find out more about what you do at Ship Happens and all of that, where should they go? Who should they talk to?
Well, they can find me on Instagram at When Ship Happens, or you can find me on LinkedIn under Jennifer Morris. That's really straightforward. I'll get you the link for that. And those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. And then we have a website as well. It's ship-happens.ca.
I'll put a link to all of that on the episode page on the Postal Hub podcast. I think after almost 10 years, this is the first time anyone's mentioned an Instagram handle on the podcast, though. Oh. My goodness. It's not like Instagram's new, right?
I love being a first. That's great.
There we are. What'll happen next, everybody? With TikTok or whatever else it is that young people are into. Anyway, so I'll put links on the episode page on thepostalhub.com so you can get in contact with Jen if you want to find out more about what she does and some of the opportunities that might be out there. Jenn Morris from shiphappens.com. Thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you. It was a great time.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Kathy Morrow-Robertson from Logistics Trends and Insights will be talking about UPS's strategy. We'll be joined by Peter Backman. Peter is going to talk about restaurant delivery, delivering meals and things like that. Do go back and check out the interview I did with Peter last year. We're going to be continuing that conversation a little bit further. And we'll be joined by other great speakers over the coming weeks. Too numerous and too fabulous to mention right now. Do make sure, please subscribe to the podcast in the podcast platform of your choosing so that you receive each episode as it's uploaded. You can download it. You know what I mean. Subscribe early, subscribe often, leave a rating, which is really good, and leave a review if you feel so moved. You can follow me on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to my email newsletter over at thepostalhub.com. You can subscribe to the Daily Delivery Digest or even the Post Office Digest if you're a fellow post office enthusiast. If you want to email me, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.